Ray, Tommy, aren't you going to talk about that new Velma show?
No.
But you love Scooby Doo. Talk about the new show.
No.
Why not?
I don't wanna.
Well, we gotta talk about something, Scooby Doo. You got something left over from Scooby Doo month?
You know what? I do. I think I do have something. Hi, folks. Welcome to Creepy Puppets Presents. I am your humble puppeteer, Tommy, and I like to talk about the darker aspects of philosophy, and I'm also a bit of a Scooby Doo nerd. So Scooby Doo is back in the cultural zeitgeist, and I don't want to touch the reason why with a 10-foot pole. So I want to talk about something nearly all Scooby Doo fans can get around. Hot goth girls. Yes, let's talk a little bit about the Hex Girls, my generation's collective first goth crush. Though if I'm being honest, for me personally, my first goth crush was Scarlet Witch from X-Men Evolution. So in the original continuity, and check out this video for my thoughts on Scooby-Doo continuity, the original continuity of Thorn, Sally McKnight, claims to be 1/16th Wiccan, a fact that allows her to use the spell that banishes Sarah Ravencroft, the spectral villain of Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost, which was the property that introduced the Hex Girls. And can I just say how progressive it is for the spell book to not have a minimum Wiccan blood quantum? So this is probably the first time my entire generation heard the term Wicca. And, this particular point in Witch's Ghost has been kind of mocked because Wicca is a religion, not an ethnicity. It's relatively new, dating back to the 1950s, and many people, including myself, think it's kind of silly. But what I want to offer in defense is the argument that what Thorn actually practices is a real-life form of witchcraft, but it's not Wicca, and it was just a research fail on their part. No, what Thorn practices is hereditary witchcraft. Now, there's a misconception out there that hereditary witchcraft refers to a tradition in the family, so that someone was raised with traditional practices. But that's not what hereditary witchcraft is in cultures that believe in hereditary witchcraft. So in cultures that believe in hereditary witchcraft, like Italy and Romania, hereditary witchcraft is the idea that the magical talent is a genetic trait. Even if your family doesn't practice witchcraft anymore, people who come from hereditary witchcraft lines will still have some level of supernatural power. Now, in my case, my mother, whose family came from Sicily, always had these dreams that would come true, and I also have very similar dreams from time to time. In fact, in my family, we have this sort of code, like, I'm telling you about this dream. Hey, check on so-and-so because I had a dream where something bad happened to him, because we just sort of know that this sort of stuff tends to manifest. So I was rather interested to find out that this is one of the conventional gifts associated with hereditary witchcraft in Italian culture. I was able to be initiated into Benedicaria over the past 7 months or so. So from July to, if you know anything about Benedicaria, one is fully initiated on Christmas Eve. So I have now been initiated into the practice of Italian hereditary witchcraft. So it seems like that's what Thorn actually practices, right? She practices some kind of genetic ability to engage in witchcraft, and the belief in hereditary witchcraft is sufficiently old that it's entirely plausible for it to have been practiced in the 1600s. So while we're here trying to collectively purge the show from our experience, let's talk about something even more universally popular among Scooby-Doo fans, Zombie Island. Now, Zombie Island is built around voodoo, another religion which has a substantial magico-religious component. And like this franchise's misunderstanding of Wicca, this franchise's grasp of voodoo and of other Afro-Caribbean religions is even worse. Now, I personally practice a voodoo-adjacent religious practice of Espiritismo, or Spiritism. Now, kind of. This was a reform movement of the spiritualist movement that started in France, but once it reached the Caribbean and South America, it became heavily syncretized with voodoo and other Afro-Caribbean religions and the Native American beliefs of the region, especially the Taino people. I'm not initiated into voodoo, though I imagine I probably will be eventually. I'm very interested in the Puerto Rican Sanse tradition of voodoo. But my point is that I have experience with some aspects of voodoo that are practiced as part of Espiritismo. So, What is voodoo? Voodoo is a religion that ultimately comes from West Africa, primarily the Kingdom of Dahomey in what is now Benin. Through the slave trade and through missionary work in Africa, Voodoo and other Afro-Caribbean religions tended to be heavily syncretized together, and with Catholicism, and that was only exacerbated by the slave trade and the location of these religions to the Caribbean and South America, and even into North America and places like New Orleans. So the basic belief system is that there is a single God who is incredibly powerful, tri-omni God, but who doesn't directly intervene in his creation. In fact, he creates spirits called Loa, or Los Misterios in Spanish-speaking countries, and it's these beings who intervene on God's behalf in creation. Now, these beings have free will, and unless they run contrary to the will of God, in most cases can choose to answer your prayers or not. So, through initiation into various traditions, and through the practice of reciprocal sacrifice and gift giving, you build a relationship with your patron Loa, you give gifts to your Loa, booze, tobacco, blood on some occasions, and as your relationship with the Loa deepens, they will help you get stuff like money and legal victory and stuff. I mean, we are talking about a religion that's commonly practiced by very poor, marginalized communities. But also there's this idea, similar to Aleister Crowley's idea of the true will, that the spirits know your destiny and can help you achieve it. So I suppose we should talk about some of the parts of the religion that are most well known in popular culture. Zombies. A zombie, the term comes from the Congolese word for the dead or the ancestors. In fact, the Congolese word for God is Nzambe Mpungo, which basically means the divine dead one, the divine ancestor. And not just indigenous religion, but if you're Christian or Muslim Congo speaker, you also call God Nzambi. So in the usual case, zombie is a zombie astral. The zombie astral is an earthbound spirit, a ghost, that has been bound into slavery by magical means to the will of a Bokor, a necromancer. The idea is that you feed the zombie with sacrifices, and the zombie gets stronger and is then able to be ordered around, and so instead of having to ask the Loa for favors, you can order the zombie to carry out your will. Of course, this is thought to be incredibly dangerous because if a zombie becomes too powerful, a zombie that becomes too powerful can overwhelm the necromancer and destroy them. There's also generally a distinction between Christian zombies and what are called unbaptized or Jewish zombies. So a baptized zombie is a zombie that was a good person but is otherwise earthbound, so like the victim of a violent crime. And in this sense, the practice of being bound for a short time as the slave of the necromancer facilitates sort of like the zombie's time in purgatory. However, the unbaptized are earthbound spirits who are violent, murderers, thieves, people who would be bound for hell otherwise, who are working with the Bokor because the alternative is to be sent to some place worse than being the slave of the Bokor. There are living zombies. I'm not really allowed to talk about that, but that is not what most people mean in voodoo when they talk about zombies. This practice ultimately comes from the necromantic practices of the Congo, and so even though they're called something different, they have a variety of names, the Palo Mayombe religion is basically Congo necromancy without a lot of modifications. So, ironically, if you want a whole religion that focuses on zombies, you might want to consider Palo. So we should probably talk about voodoo dolls a little bit. I'll leave a link to a video by Sanquista Luis, who is a voodoo practitioner, where he discusses the voodoo dolls from an insider's perspective. But voodoo dolls are, or spirit dolls, what they're properly called, are dolls that contain the power of a spirit. Oftentimes the power of a deceased ancestor, but they can also work like tulpas, or constructs and be created for a specific purpose. And then they receive sacrifices and the power in the dolls grows. I do have one voodoo doll, like real voodoo doll, that I will probably talk about at some point in the future. It should go without saying that there are no cat gods in voodoo, and generally in the Christianized interpretation of voodoo, there is only one god. But there are powerful Loa who can do things similar to transformations through the power of possession. Also, and this will largely be my last point, but I'm just going to throw it in. So there's this TV special called Scooby Doo Ghastly Goals, where they face a monster called an Exu, which is said to be a Brazilian trickster spirit. And Exu is a Brazilian trickster spirit, but it's also another name for Papa Legba, who is one of the most important and popular Loa in voodoo and other Afro-Caribbean religions. So it's rather interesting that even in that case, they failed to get voodoo correct. Alright, well that's all for this time. Let's look forward to better Scooby-Doo projects in the future, and I'll be back at some point later in February. Have a nice day, folks. Bye-bye.